Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the next episode of Growth Minded Contractor. I'm your host, Ryan Groff, and I'm just so excited to have our guest on today. This is not a roofing contractor. My guest is um, somebody that I've been getting to know in person or directly very recently, but indirectly over the last couple of years. You guys are in for a treat today. Also a speaker at our Transform conference coming up very soon. It's like less than a month away. It's crazy in Dallas. But before we do that, I want to mention a few of our partners that are partnered with STG. So one is Adam Sands, roofing business partner, does great work with CRM implementation, along with Sumo Quote Builds, killer, great competitive partner, or competitive advantage to have as a partner. Also, Sumo Quote, the technology to help beautify your proposals, and WebRunner Media, digital paid ad specialists. Those three guys are awesome friends and partners of SCG. Go check them out. But let's dive in. So Jamie Winship is our guest today. He's the founder of Identity Exchange, former police officer that turned into just I don't know how you describe you, but transformation special. Not now a contractor. No, but I met Jamie as I moved from. I was in Maui for 2.5 years. We plan on going back, but we're currently moving to the DFW area. And when I was in Maui, I met Jamie indirectly through some friends of mine. And so I started to build some great relationships on the island with some great friends. And I've been talking about identity or learning about identity since probably 2011, when I went to a church and for the first time I heard that God was proud of me and I'm his son. And I never heard that before. I was like, wait, I didn't pray more than I should, or didn't I not pray enough yesterday, or didn't I not make a mistake? And so I felt I always had a heavy amount of shame just in my existence as a person, just for being who I was, which was, it's been since 2010, I've been just kind of peeling back the onion and finding the heart more and more. I never stop. So it's crazy how complex we are as humans. But I have been on this journey, and when I heard of Jamie, I heard of what he actually does, and it was so cool. I said that sounds like an upgrade to me. And so I actually went on his website, and what really piqued my interest was the fact that I have a buddy of mine who plays professional baseball, and he and I were great friends. I was in his wedding. He's amazing. I've known him before. He's a major leaguer, and he and I share resources and books and stuff. And he was like, check out this guy, Michael Gervais. He talks about, he's got this course called Compete to Create, and he partners with Pete Carroll with the Seahawks. So I already went through his course, and I was really piqued because Michael Gervais was talking about identity. He was talking about being versus doing and functioning from a place of being. And I was like, this dude is onto something that no one in sports talks about, because I'm talking about this and it's a paradox because we're competitors, we're business people, and I'm a former athlete talking to my buddy who's an athlete. And then when I heard about Jamie and his work, which I'm about to talk to you as if you're in the room here in a second, Jamie, is that I heard that Jamie worked with the Seahawks with Pete Carroll, and ended up hearing about this story that I'll let you share in a moment. But what that did to me was it got my attention, for real. And then, of course, as a faith guy and person of faith, the lens in which I was hearing that from also piqued my interest. So I started to go online, and I met a guy named Norris, who's one of your coaches, on identityexchange.com. And I went on there, I booked a call. I spent a couple of $100 to have Norris ask me some amazing questions. And what I experienced was this new discipline of starting to hear directly from God rather than, through people or a word of encouragement or whatever it may be. And it started this new source of truth that sounds so basic, but I was just honestly not living like that. And so I started this out. And then I listened to a video of you before my conference with my clients in March of 2021. Wow, it's been a year and a half. And I heard about you doing this exercise with people who weren't of faith. And I heard how you did it, and something emboldened me, and I just did it with everybody in the room. There's like 100 people there. And I had people telling me like some incredible things. And this started to build this really massive amount of excitement and curiosity around something that just out of what you're doing. And I'm really honored to have you on this show, and then honored to have you join me at our conference, because I believe that what you're bringing is something that most people are shoving sort of to the side and then adding a bunch of things to it. And it's just really interesting. So I'm not going to share a whole lot more of your introduction, but Jamie Winship, welcome to the show. And I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. Wow, it's great to hear that journey that you're on and all the ways God works and intersects, and it's really amazing. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So maybe give us a quick background, and just like, what is it you do? And I think, we had talked about our conference a couple of weeks ago, and we started to talk about what we're going to do at the conference and what it's about. So I think if we could just kind of take our listeners into like, what is it that you do in your work, right? Because they're probably wondering, who's Jamie? He's not a contractor. What's going on here? So talk a little bit about that. Maybe talk about like what happened with the Seahawks and in that group, and then let's just kind of take that into maybe the industry that we're in, which is contracting. Ultimately, that's what we want to see, is a transformation of an industry. So before we get into that, let's give our listeners just a chance to get to know you.
Yeah. So well, it started for me really when I was a police officer back then, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a police officer. Went to university, went into the academy, came out into the police department, and so that was the vocation I intended for the rest of life. And once and I worked in a major police department. And once I got through 1 year of training with my training officer, who was one of the hardest people I've ever been with in my life.
Well, what was his? What was it? I read the book, and you cracked me up with that description.
Yeah, we called him the troll.
The troll.
The troll. Yeah, because he was this mean little. He is, not was. He still is, and I love him. But he was a mean little Irish, typical police officer, from this long tradition of Irish police officers. And he was one tough person. And so, but he was a great mentor. He was a great guy to learn from and be trained by, but he didn't cut you any slack. And so the things I learned from him, and then when we got cut loose, it's called, when you're free of your training officer and you go on your own. Once I was in that on my own, I just realized that there's stuff that you're trained in the academy and in the university and all that stuff that's really good and really helpful. But then as we all know, you go into life and there's situations and circumstances that you aren't prepared for. Your training doesn't go there, or the person doesn't do what they're supposed to do when you do the right training with them. And so pretty quickly I was in this scenario of simply, is there another way to think about this? If I'm in a scenario where I've prepared and trained and I get into that scenario and it's different than what I thought, is there another way to access knowing what to do other than what I already know how to do? Is there another way of knowing? Really was my question. Mm-hmm. And so I could look at other police officers, senior detectives and all that. But what I wanted was, I was interested in a way of being a police officer that brought healing and redemption to people that I interacted with beyond just locking people up. Like, I knew I could do that. Anyone can do that stuff. What I wanted to know, was there a way to, a person calls 911, a police officer shows up, and that police officer brings the greatest thing that's ever happened in that person's life. Is that possible? Is it just dreamed and wish? Is it cliche? But I wanted to know if it was possible. And so really there was no one to ask. There was no pastor to ask. There was no police officer to ask. And the challenge I had in my mind was, because I did grow up in a faith tradition, was I had this image of Jesus in my mind of, if Jesus was coming to their house, what would happen? That kind of thing. And so I just carried a notebook with me, and I would get in these situations and I would just ask God. And this is, I really want to stress this. This was a purely vocational pursuit. I wasn't trying to be more religious or spiritual. I wanted to be the absolute best police officer that I could be. So my questions were motivated by I wanted to excel in what I was doing to a higher level. And to do that, I felt like there were other ways to think about policing besides what I had been trained in. So I just carried this notebook, and I would get in these scenarios, and I would know what to do in my training. And then I would just take a couple of minutes and say, God, is there another way to think about this? Is there another way to handle this? Is there another way to investigate this scene, or to talk to this person that I don't know about? And if there is another way of knowing, how would I know it? Like, just as practically, like, would it be an idea that comes to my mind? Would I have a vision or something? Like, how would this knowledge or wisdom be communicated to me? And so I would just write down questions in this notebook, and then I would have these ideas come to my mind. I would write them down, and then I would go try them. And that's just how I started. And it was rough, and it was, sometimes things worked and sometimes they didn't. But what was really interesting was how quickly those ideas would start to come. The more I did it, and then I would begin. It was like learning to listen to the police radio. You just have to discipline yourself and train to hear it. And then you get to a place where, in the middle of absolute firefight, I can hear the radio, the police radio. I can hear it. It's a voice that I can hear in any situation. And I realized that's how the voice of God is. That I could learn to hear the voice of God the way God speaks to me in any circumstance. And so I trained in that, just like I trained in anything else. And as I experimented with it and tried ideas, and they would start to work, I could refine it. Like, no, I know that voice, or that's just me, and I started to get promoted, and I started to make significant cases, and I was officer of the year, and I made detective, and so it didn't, fine-tuning this access to wisdom made me more successful in my vocation. That's how it worked.
So can you tell me, and I remember hearing a podcast of yours where you had shared a story about, maybe it was in your book as well, which is called Living Fearless. It was about how you had really gone way out of protocol when you heard the voice of wisdom. You've probably done this a few times, but there was one particular story that was like, can you tell that story? I don't want to ruin it, but yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I went way out of protocol a lot of times, but learning how to do it. And so it was, I think, the one you're talking about, the first time it really caused a stir in my squad was, we were working a kidnapping from a bus stop, and just day work, the school calls the police, go to the scene. This teacher saying this kid didn't show up at school, check with the parents. We dropped him at the bus stop. He was at elementary school. And we realized, wow, this somewhere between dropped off at the bus stop and the school, this child has disappeared. and it was like 2 hours later. So in those cases, every hour is just, it's the further away you get from the incident, the worse your chance of anything good coming out of it. And so we were interviewing elementary kids at the bus stop, and like they're not great witnesses. But so we set up a perimeter, and the helicopter was out, and we were looking, and I went and met with the parents. And at the time, we had two small sons, and so I was talking to the father, the dad, and obviously he was hysterical, and the mom. And I said to him, my partner was with me, and I said to him, we're gonna find your kid. I promise you, we're gonna find your kid. We're gonna do it. We're gonna find him. And we walked away. And of course, that's a violation of protocol. You never say something like that to a parent. You never promise anything like that or give them false hope. And my partner was really upset. My partner was senior to me, and he's like, not to do that. That's a violation of our training. And I knew it. I said, I know. I just felt like I wanted to say that to him. Anyway, we split up. He goes off, and I go to my cruiser, and I'm just driving around the neighborhood, and I pull over on the side on this residential street, and I just stop. I just say to God, is there a way to know where this kid is? Like, is that something you do, you still do, you don't do anymore? Like, what's justice? How would I know if you were going to direct me at that level? I just was asking the question, and I was really sad and frustrated. And when I prayed that, this car came down the street from behind me, just going, 25, 30 miles an hour down this residential street. And when it passed my cruiser, I just felt like sick to my stomach, or like someone punched me in the stomach. And because I had been practicing this, I was really aware, and I talk about this in the book, attention, awareness, enunciation, action. Every time I asked a question like that, I became very attentive and aware of what was happening around me right after I'd asked the question. And so this was pretty clear. The car passes me, I feel really sick and nauseous. I associate it with the car. I cut the car off, actually. And I get out of my cruiser, and I could see that there's just the driver in the car, no one in the passenger area. And so I just say to him, get out and open up your trunk right now. Get out and open up your trunk. And the guy's pretty shocked, and he just gets out, and he opens up the trunk, and the kid is in the trunk of the car, and he's okay. And it was just, all me and the guy and the kid were all just stunned at what had happened. And so I called the detectives, and they come onto the scene, and they make the arrest and everything. And that detective there, he's an old, crusty old detective. He says to me, "How did you know how to stop that car? What was your probable cause for stopping that car?" And I said, well, I was praying. And he said, no. He said, no, you have to be in court. You have to be able to give probable cause of why you stopped this car. And so I learned in that situation, and I was Officer of the Year because of that situation. And the guy pled guilty, so I didn't ever have to testify, actually. But I learned in that scenario that this kind of thing is real. It's true, but it has to work in real life. Like, if you pull a car over, there has to be probable cause. All of that has to be figured out and determined. It's this great learning process. But that really got it going for me. That was like, those kind of events, I've experienced those more in my life, but those are more rare, obviously, than just the more normal kinds of things that just can occur in every day when you're we would say fixing your eyes on Jesus and asking him questions about everything you're doing. It's remarkable what happens in a vocation when you're doing that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's something I would love to see happen in the industry, in my life more, in my vocation, but in the vocation of the industry we're in, which is people who are actually protecting homes and properties,
Yes.
buildings that add value, that keep people safe, that literally the world is running in and out of homes and buildings, and
Yeah.
that's what we at STG serve that industry,
Mm-hmm.
and that industry is the one we're in. And so it's funny, like, I want to talk about a lot with you. I wish we had more time. One thing that I think is like at large, the identity of contractors at large in the eyes of most is not a positive one.
Hmm.
And like there's actually like, and it all comes from within, but let's talk about like for a second how, because I'm like envisioning, the country looking at contractors as an example
Yeah,
in
right now.
society, but right now it's almost like an embarrassment. Somebody says I work in the building and materials industry. They don't say I'm
Yeah.
a roofer because there's
Mm,
there's a negative association with their vocation, which is of simple, which many people find their identities in.
hmm.
And so one thing I'm constantly like struggling with and learning to grow in is knowing my identity and taking my identity into what I do rather than trying to find my identity in what I do. And
Right.
so, like, there's a lot that starts to happen, like performance and how what people think. Like, I'm going through a weird thing right now where, like, I'm I'm personally going through a weird thing where I'm like, like we were living in Hawaii and now we're in Dallas and we just got a really inexpensive rental, but we've been living like the rich young ruler, and
Mm,
I'm like feeling a challenge from God to say, are you finding your identity even still in those amazing things? And I was reminded by some friends at a campfire, and Steve Petermeyer, a friend of yours who's going to be at the
hmm.
conference, was with us. And one of my friends talked about the rich young ruler because, like that man, when Jesus approached him or they approached one another, was basically like, look, like I don't curse, I don't drink, I don't cheat on my wife, I check every box. I'm pretty like I don't sin essentially. And he goes, I've been doing that since I was a kid. And I feel like as I've grown in my identity, I'm functioning in a more fruitful way.
Hmm.
But there's also this challenge at the end, um, where Jesus was just like, dude, well, hey, sell everything you have, give to the poor, follow me. And when I was like sitting in that seat thinking about me, I'm like, that would be really hard for me. Is it like,
Hmm.
and so I'm just expressing like this journey of identity and how powerful it is of a message. But that's really at the end of the day, what I think is a big problem in our society, and what I think there's so much pressure in society is to answer the question, who am I? And like,
Hmm.
do I have what it takes, or am I enough? And I think like you're even seeing it crawling into our society in a different way where people are trying to make up what they want in their identity, like just
Yeah.
to find a sense of like ultimately to find a sense of value and in a sense of worth. And I'm just so impacted by this message. And the more and more I talk and hear about it, the more central it has to be to like what I do and what I share. And that's why I'm so excited you're coming, because to our conference, because you're going to help the whole room function or understand who they are. And I think that that's the question we all want to answer, because if you look at most contractors, I mean, you're still seeing guys who are successful and they find so much of their self-worth in anything that they do. It could be outside of what they do, but everyone's trying to find the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, like, and what you're seeing and what the kind of maybe the consequences are of people who don't know their identity, and maybe some of the things that you're doing in your work to help people find it, and like what the impact is of that and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really true, everything you're saying. So think of it as a person's identity is their gift to the world. Your identity is what makes you unique from everyone else. From everyone else. So your identity is the essence. It's the essence of the I that you carry deep within you, and it's grounded in love.
Mhm.
And the true identity, the true you, is whole. WHOLE is whole. It means there's no inner conflict going on. When you're in the essence of who you are, the truth of who you are, there's no inner conflict going on. And because there's no inner conflict going on, your resiliency level is off the charts. So you can have people, we work with special forces and all those types of folks. You can have resilient people who are not whole. And resilient people who are not whole are dangerous people. They're good. They can endure very difficult situations. What they can't endure is peace. They can't endure being in a non-war situation. And so the suicide rate among the teams we just trained, who are very high level special forces, is 12 a day is the suicide rate among these. And these people, you could put them in any condition and they can fight and survive, except you can't put them in a suburban neighborhood because they fall apart. The reason they fall apart is because they get their identity from their vocation. The challenge for the rich young ruler is not that he was rich, it's that his identity was tied to his wealth, right? That's the challenge. Is there's nothing wrong with being a rich young ruler. If the problem is that's his identity, and it's not an identity. None of those three words are an identity. Just like Navy SEAL is not an identity, police officer is not an identity, contractor is not an identity, mom is not an identity, dad is not an identity, and the different identities we call ourselves, whether it's a religious identity or gender identities, are not identities. That's called radical individualism. Radical individualism creates conflict all the time. True identity gets rid of conflict all the time, right? So radical individualism is just me coming up with who I am and just saying it out here. This is who I'm going to be. I don't care what you think. As soon as I say it like that, I have a conflict. True identity is what God knit together in my mother's womb when he made me. And it is my gift to the world. And so it produces wholeness not only in me, in other people. So we did a training for a little HVAC company, and we taught the technicians identity and wholeness and resiliency. And what those technicians could do when they went to a house is they could repair things and all that. But what they did really well was they brought wholeness to the customer. And so what happened was the people started calling the technicians to their house even when they didn't have any real problem with their system, because they wanted that person to come to them, there was something about that person. And it's just like when I was a cop, people would call the police and you'd get there and there's nothing really happening. They knew that there was something about these officers who understood who identity that they could give to the people, and the people wanted to receive it from them. So the identity piece is critical to me. So if my identity is not police officer, then the reason it makes me whole and resilient is because then when I go to a case or I'm working something and I feel like God's inviting me into something that risks my career, right? This is like Jesus saying to the rich young ruler, get rid of all of it and follow me. It's like Jesus saying to me, here, I want you to do something for this family, and I want you to be willing to lose your police career over it. The only reason I'd be willing to lose my police career is because it's not my identity. But if it is my identity, I cannot lose it at any cost. I cannot lose it, because if I lose my job, I lose myself. And this is the trap we all find ourselves in, is I get my identity from what I do, what I have, and what people think about me. If I get my identity from one or all of those three things, first of all, I am going to live in constant fear of losing any of that. and it makes me live in a state of fear, which is self-protection and self-promotion, self-protection and self-promotion, which means the only thing I can really be interested in is myself, which means I can't really be on a team at any real deep level.
Wow.
And I'm not going to sacrifice or empty myself for another because I have to protect myself.
Oh my God.
So when you're walking people into the truth of who they are, it doesn't make them like go into poverty. It's hilarious. What it does is it makes them move to a level of being that is so high and powerful that whatever they do has greater impact. Right? So being informs doing. So if my identity, if my sense of self is I'm unworthy and I'm inadequate, I've got to keep proving and trying and striving and look at this house I got, and look at this car I got, and look how I have to, because it's my identity. But if I already have my identity, I don't need to say any of that. And all I'm interested in is being other focused and serving the other person. When you're doing that with human beings, it affects them. And if we were doing that in our vocation, like you're saying, it's the person wouldn't be saying, I'm calling a contractor. They would be saying, I'm calling that amazing identity who not only can build a house, they can bring wholeness and resiliency to my family while they're doing it, or to my neighborhood while they're doing it. And who would not call that company if that was possible?
Wow. It's amazing. Oh my gosh. I think about like how much conflicted striving people live in every single day, and like how even like being a servant to others is how leaders ought to be, but how people who still have identity or radical individualism don't know their identity actually like try to manipulate themselves to actually look, but they can't function in it, and so they pretend, or they're posing as servant leaders, but they
Right.
still have something that they're kind of baiting and switching back
Yes.
to themselves, because they can't be selfless because they're still have conflict about like themselves. So because their identity is not, they're not identity aware yet.
Right.
It's like wild. It's like even servant leadership, it just isn't authentic most of the time, and you feel the manipulation of it, and it's not like someone is truly bad, it's just they are conflicted still.
Right.
I'm fascinated by what you're saying, because what you're talking about could be possible for like a contractor in their vocation, but it sounds impossible. Actually, it does sound impossible. Like, and it sounds, here's the other thing. Industry wide, it sounds uninteresting because it's about others, and they're not they're still not self-full in a way in their identity, so that they're can be selfless. They're still selfish. So even still, like most contractors are building up some empire up into themselves anyway, and they'll would never truly think about community transformation in their vocation.
Right.
And so like, but there are starting to be beautiful saints out there who are starting to see the possibilities, and that's kind of where I'm like, there's that crack. Like, let's make that the focal point more. And what does that look like? Let's answer the question: what does it look like to be a vocation that people say, I will never forget when that roofer came to my house.
Exactly.
I will never forget what happened. That
That's right.
blew my mind. What happened? I cannot unexperience them. I experienced somebody that I never would have expected.
That's right. Yeah. And right, and that's the way to think about it. And you're exactly right. The servant leadership gimmick, it's like a gimmick.
It
Um,
is.
yeah, and
I'm
it's
like no one's saying that. It's such like a it's not real yet.
no.
It's
And
not.
yeah, and so the definition of hypocrisy, if you read, if when Jesus is talking about hypocrites, hypocrisy is life lived by technique. What that means is like, okay, I'm going to become a servant leader because if I figure out the servant leader technique, I can get what I want, right? And that's hypocrisy. I mean, that's the and and so the servant leadership role is not so you get what you want, it's so the other gets what they want. And that sounds horrible. That sounds like well then I'm going to be, destitute and overrun by the competition, but it's just absolutely false. And the reason it is because you said the word empire. That it's not we're not trying to build an empire. We're trying to build a kingdom, right? And so
Mm,
we have to choose which one we want to see built. Do we want to see an empire built or a kingdom built? And so
gosh.
that's the whole message of the scriptures. Do we want Caesar or Jesus in charge? Right? Caesar is the empire builder, and that's what some people want. And Jesus is the kingdom builder.
Wow.
And the kingdom is other focused, self-emptying, unconditional love for the other. That's the kingdom. But what we watch is Jesus takes 12 different kinds of people, and without an army and without any real political power, he teaches them to own the entire Roman Empire in 300 years, and they do. They take over the entire thing to where Constantine himself is now a believer. That's what he's showing them. The empire brags, but it's built on power and control and fear, and it will destroy itself. The kingdom is built on love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, which is a resiliency level that if you even burn them at the stake, they will not stop.
And they will smile while it's happening.
But the empire people will quit as soon as they think they're going to lose, they'll quit. But not kingdom people. They will go. And so when we were doing things with professional athletes, I would ask them, like, what's the driving emotion that you're using when you're training and playing and practicing? And for a majority of them, it's fear. It's
Mm.
fear and anger. And so, like, what are you afraid of? Well, we're, injury. One injury, our everything is gone. A better player comes along. Any of these things, and they're constantly in that world. And are we going to get cut? And all of this, and so they're practicing, they're working based in an anxiety mode that a lot of us are in our vocations. And so I ask them the question: when you started playing the sport, what was the motivation? Joy.
Yeah.
But we lost it when this became our identity. When this sport became my identity, that now I can't lose it. Now I can't fail. If I fail, it's over, that kind of thing. And so in the kingdom, the motivation is love and joy. So when you encounter a person with love and joy, it affects humans. And when they're, whatever the vocation they're in, one of the guys in our city here, the superintendent of schools, like, I walked him through this process last year, and he's in a very politicized position, and he has a lot of people gunning for his position, and so it's very much a power struggle all the time. And so when he understood identity, though, and stopped getting his identity from his position as superintendent, he was willing to let the superintendent position go. So, and that's, he just came to that place in his heart. I'm willing to let this go. As soon as he did that, he was a better leader. His leadership went off the charts because he wasn't getting his identity. And so he started a meeting with people in the room that were after his position. And he started the meeting by saying, I just want to tell you the truth. My greatest fear is that I'm a disappointment as a leader. He said that to his competitors, and the room just went silent. And then he said, but let me tell you, that's a false identity. Let me tell you how I've come to the truth of who I really am. And he explained the process to him. And he said, while I'm in this position, I want to lead you all into becoming the truth of who you really are, so that you can perform at the highest level possible. He did that. And he did that to all the principals, to everyone. He gave everything away that he knew about how to get to the position he was at. And because of it, 3 universities came in and asked him to be leadership. Like, he didn't go down, he went up. And so we say, in the walk with Jesus, when Jesus lowers himself, he's given the name above all names. When he humbles himself, he's given the name above all names. So in the walk with God, in order to go up, you go down. Like, that's the principle. You humble yourself. And that's all about understanding your identity.
Wow. So how does one truly find and start to learn, and how does someone truly, because we're all different, right?
Right.
And like there's buckets that we're in that I like started, like for me, 2010, someone said to me, "You're no longer a prodigal, you're a son." And so that was a bucket that I fit in, and I still would say yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people though. You're a son,
Yes.
you're a child of God. I am
Right.
too. But that was a game changer. Just hearing that, like I thought, here's literally what I thought. I called her. She's been a friend for some years at this point. And I said, "This is so weird, but I have to clarify. I heard when you said you're no longer a prodigal, you're a son. I heard you're no longer a prodigal, you're a son." Like, because I had sinned and I failed in a sinful way before that meeting in which I heard that. So, but then I was like, but I also heard this like really different voice that said, like, "Hey, you're not a prodigal, you're a son." Almost like I'm proud of you. And I never heard that before.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I was like, she goes, "What?" I was like, "What was it?" Like hoping, like, please tell me it was the second one. I had to know because I didn't really know. And
Mm-hmm.
then she said, "Oh, it was the second one for sure." And I'm like, "Really?" So I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
like, wow. And then that started this journey. But like as I've been learning from you, I feel like there's like I have 4 and now I have my 5th kid on the way, right? And I have every one of those kids, every one of my kids, I have like I call them all differently. They're
Right.
all and I say you're my favorite, and then I say their last name or their first name. Like, "You're my favorite." I can never end the sentence with just them because they're all
Right.
my favorite. But he's my favorite Asher. You're my favorite Hunter. You're my
Mm.
favorite Channing. You're my favorite Naomi. And then I'm just really blown away by this message. I can't tell you. There's nothing that I'm thinking about more. Um, and I I'm just asking the question, like, how does one find who they are to be that gift to the world? What does that really look like? And is it a journey? Is it a continuous process? Is it a
Yeah.
one-time event? What is it? Because that's what the world needs to know, right?
Yeah. And it's understanding the depth of who you are is an eternal journey. Understanding what God did when God made you is an eternal journey,
Mm,
because it's so beautiful and it's so amazing. And
mm,
I'm 62, and I'm doing things in my life now that I wouldn't 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I wouldn't even have known to ask for. I wouldn't even because I would have never thought I was capable of doing it. I just would have
wow.
never known.
Can you give me an example?
Well, like I just sold a screenplay. Like,
Well,
I mean, it's like that was something that was so far out of my mind, but it's something that the Lord knew was in my heart. I didn't even know it was there.
wow.
But as I look back on the journey of my life, I can see it. I can see it. Oh my gosh, this has been going this way for
What an
years.
adventure! Like, it feels like such an
It,
adventure.
it is. And so when Jesus, that's what I was saying to these guys I was working with the other day who were in law enforcement, the medical profession. There's a group, and we're talking about transforming our vocations. And I was saying to them, when Jesus calls the young disciples, he doesn't give them a list of responsibilities and expectations. He just says, follow me. That's all he says to them. Follow me. And then he makes this promise to them, and I will make you to become fishers of men. So when I interact with God, it's always an invitation. God knit me together in my mother's womb, and he's saying to me, follow me, and I will make you to become everything that's in there that you long to be, that you don't even know. But I will make you to become it if you will follow me, right? And so it's not like you got to make yourself become that. So when you think, oh, I got to make myself become this, now it's back to you're making yourself into that thing instead of being that and watching what that is becoming. So Kierkegaard
It
said,
just hit me like Peter was asked to follow him, and he will make him fishers of men. But was that the last thing he called him?
yeah, right. Oh, this
Right?
is the beginning. Just
That
the
was
beginning.
just the beginning.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm 62, and I say to my wife all the time, like, I don't know what else to ask for. Like I'm out. But it's still, then there's this next thing that happens, and you're like, oh my gosh. So all I wanted was just to be a police officer. And the Lord's like, oh, that's just the beginning.
Don't even know.
You have no idea. But the key, follow me. Get your identity from me. Don't get it from being a police officer. Don't get it from writing a screenplay. Because if you will get your identity from the Lord, receive it from the Lord, then the true identity can receive everything that God has for you. The false identity cannot receive it. It
Talk about
cannot
that.
receive
Talk
it.
about
So the false me has to self-protect and self-promote. It's all inward focused. It can't open up and just say, God, whatever you have for me today, I receive it. Because I can't, but except don't take this away from me, and don't move that, and don't hurt me. And like, it's this right. So it's not a true statement. God, I want to follow you. It's dishonest. It's hypocritical. So when you're doing the identity process, which we'll all do together, it's going to be amazing, I promise you.
Yes.
When you walk through the identity process, and I do this just talking to people, that's the beauty. Like, if you can imagine being a contractor on a job, and you have the capacity just to have a conversation with a person, it's not a big deal. Every human has a sense of the true down inside of them. It's just buried under all the fear, guilt, and shame of life.
Yeah.
And you can just start to touch that true identity. Boom, just touch it. And what we do with every person that we're talking to is what Jesus does. He takes away their fear. Once he takes away their fear, then the true them starts to move out like this. So that's why his exhortation, when he calls Peter, and Peter says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. I can't go. I'll fail you. That's self-protection and self-promotion. He's pushing Jesus's invitation away. And why? And Jesus says, don't be afraid. He doesn't say, you're not a sinful man. He says, don't be afraid. Your fear is shutting you down. Don't be afraid. Just follow me, and I will be with you, and I will lead you, and I'll go, all that. And so when we're doing the identity process with people, it was wild. I was speaking to 500 faculty members in a public school here, and I was just recently, and I was walking out just 20 minutes with this 500 faculty member, and I'm walking out, and these two teachers come up to me in the parking lot, and they're like, how do we know our true identity? Because I was just doing a general, and I said, well, before you get to the true, you need to get rid of the false. You can't go to the true until you've let go of the false. And I said, so I'm just standing in the parking lot with these total strangers. And I said, okay, so I want you to think about right now, what are things you believe about yourself that hurt you?
Mm.
What are names that you believe about yourself that hurt you? And probably you learned them from someone else. What are those names? And both of them started to cry.
Oh.
Because all of us are carrying those lies around with us all the time and trying to cope with them. You're a sinner. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're not worthy. You're in all the insecurities. I deal with them too all the time. Except I know the process of how to just deal with them every day like this.
That's why identity exchange
Right.
is the thing, right? And the way you do it in a non-faith express way, you call it the
Absolutely.
method. But
Yeah.
like I remember in high school, I was playing baseball and I was a stuttering case of accident prone madness. I mean, I was just a mess, like so messed up and just
Yeah.
so conflicted, right? And I remember they would call me "can't get right."
Mm.
They're like, "Can't get right." Oh, can't get right when I make an error. And I remember I found so much value in baseball because I was decent at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was like, I'm not Ryan the baseball player.
Right.
I had to like exchange that for like, and then like, so I think I love that process because I think you could even say what makes you feel bad, but then also what makes you feel really good, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
the identities that make you feel really good, where you're really strong.
Yeah.
So I would like get identity and how physically fit I felt. Although it's good to be fit, but then
Right.
you could tell when someone's like literally making their identity is their fitness.
Right.
It makes them feel good. You can go to the gym, but then guess what's happening? You look in the mirror after you eat a brownie and you say bad things about yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're like it's like another level of it. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah, I
All
love that exchange like process. Go ahead.
right. Yeah, and so then once you like are able to let go, if you have a place to give away the false, if we give that false away, and then we create this empty space, and then you ask, because every false identity you have, you received from another person, all of it. So humans aren't born, they're born like with a blank slate. That true identity is in there, but we have to hear it, we have to be taught it, we have to learn it, we have to grow, and it's a journey. So all of our sense of identity comes from an external source. That's how Adam and Eve got identity, was from hearing God tell them who they are. They didn't just come up with it. Then we're back to radical individualism. So as kids are growing up, they're hearing external voices talk to them. Like I asked this group of principals, I said, raise your hand if you can hear a voice in your head pretty regularly telling you that something's wrong with you, you're not good enough, you're overweight, you're not smart. Raise your hand. Everyone raises their hand. We all know that voice that criticizes and accuses. And I said, raise your hand if you can hear a voice telling you that you're incredible, that you're a gift to the world. Raise your hand. Nobody raises their hand.
Wow.
So here we have principals teaching teachers, and none of them have a sense of identity. So how are you leading the teachers? And teachers don't have a sense of identity. And what are they giving to students? And so that's the problem. And we're in this world where all these false identities are moving around, and we're all self-protecting and self-promoting. So but when a human has the opportunity to think through this, led through it carefully without someone trying to ram some doctrine down their throat, it's such a beautiful process with them. I do this every day with people. Just let go of the false, let it go. And they don't know that you can let it go. They don't know how to let it go. And we're going to show you how to let this go. And what happens then is the true identity comes. What does God call you? What does God say about you? Then in that it moves from reptilian brain to prefrontal cortex into the truth of who I am. I had this long conversation with a Harvard neurologist yesterday about this. And she was a believer, and she was just explaining the neurology, a little thing. But when you move up to that prefrontal cortex where Jesus wants you to be, then in that place you say, okay, let's think about being a contractor from here, from the truth of who I am. Now let's think about what does a contractor look like in this identity? And that's when, you know what we could do? We could do it this way. You know, when we build, we could do it this way. And this is where all that beautiful creativity comes out, because the thing that shuts down creativity is fear. Fear. We're not creative. And when you're afraid, all you can do is try and go for the sure thing, right? You can't be creative because you got to make sure you make money, or that it's a hit, or that you sell it. But when you're not afraid of that, then you're free to be creative. You're free to tap into the Spirit of God and creativity in whatever vocation you're in. And that's when genius happens. That's where it happens, in that beautiful state. And then you start thinking, wow, we could do this different. We could build this different. We could talk to this person different. We could do police work differently. And all it takes is one or two people in a vocation to do that. And it just, we watch it all through Scripture. One person is what always starts the thing going. Not 1,000, one, right? And so why not in the construction industry? Why not? It starts with you, Ryan. It is, and it goes out like this. And there's enough in the world for everyone. There's enough to share ideas and creativity with everyone, because we're not self-protecting and self-promoting. And the more you share, the more there is, right?
Well, if you enjoy this podcast and you want to share it, please share with your friends who you might appreciate this podcast, this episode. And if you want to know your true identity, you don't have to come to the conference to find out, but because that's not required. But we'd love to have you, because we will take time to do an incredible exercise together, in which we would discover that, which is an eternal process. It's not a one-time event. But we're excited to begin this process, because that's what I feel called to do in this industry, is to help this transformation take place. And I'm just getting warmed up. It feels like I think God's telling me I'm just getting warmed up. And it's exciting. So you can go to thetransformconference.com to register. Jamie will be there. He'll be speaking on Thursday evening on the 6th, which is going to be a lot of fun over dinner. So thanks, Jamie, so much for joining us. It's been an honor, and glad you're going to join us in Dallas.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.